When does a movie become irrelevant? Does it ever become irrelevant at all? These questions spring to mind every time someone says that a movie is dated because it uses old-fashioned special effects. Is Wrath of Khan dated because it used model spaceships instead of a computer-generated Enterprise? Some also say movies from the 50s and earlier seem corny or quaint because of the lack of cuss words, the manner in which they speak, and how they portray romance. If that is so, does that mean Casablanca is merely quaint? Suggestions such as these, however benign in intention, always cast a little bit of negativity on an otherwise amazing film. How do we see movies? From our modern perspective, the viewpoint of the time it was made, or a bit of both? Chiefest of concerns about relevancy in cinema is that of the political film. Such movies are in many ways products of their times. They tell tales of what is important to the audience of that era, whether it be the Nazi scourge, the Cold War, and everything in between. In a way, political films are among the most difficult to remain relevant in the hearts of moviegoers. The Contender, a fairly recent political film, is the story of a woman becoming vice president. She faces challenges in her confirmation hearing that would not have been thrown her way had she been a man. This is relevant today because we have never had a female vice president or president in America. In 50 years, there is a solid chance we will have had one or two or more. The Contender is a great movie, but will it be relevant later on? For that matter, are older political films from last century relevant today? Again, some say no, but there is another perspective, and we will tackle that later on. The Great Dictator, directed by Charlie Chaplin, is one of the most captivating political films of the 20th century. The film was Chaplin's statement on the Axis powers of Germany and Italy. Through humor and satire, he condemned a regime that, at the time, parts of the world were still not ready to face an armed conflict. Chaplin played dual roles in the film, both the hero and the villain. For his stand-in for Hitler, he played a dictator named Hinkle, and for the protagonist, he played an unnamed Jewish barber who may or may not have been the Little Tramp, Chaplin's earlier incarnation. It is at times goofy and at other times poignant, but more critical to today's topic, we must ask, is this slapsticky movie about a now dead dictator still relevant? We'll answer that later on. But first, another example, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Made even earlier than The Great Dictator, this Frank Capra film featured Jimmy Stewart in one of his first big successes. He played a cockeyed optimist named Jefferson Smith, appointed senator in an unlikely scenario. In his very young career, he happened upon a case of political corruption. When he tried to expose this to the public, he was framed for a crime and nearly thrown out of the Capitol building. His epic filibuster about honesty and integrity is one of Hollywood's most iconic scenes. Now that the filibuster in the American Congress is seen more as obstructionist than admirable, some may call the relevancy of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington into question. With all this firmly in mind, we return to our original question. Are classic political films still relevant to modern times? If one looks only at the surface, at the superficial, then one would come to the conclusion, no. The goofy, corniness, and hopeful but naive speeches that tie together these films may seem downright childish. These films' demands for a more equitable future and ideals based on basic human kindness come across as foolery to jaded hipsters and apathetic moderners. What's more, the time periods being discussed were so long ago that there is a kind of disconnect and emotional distance if these films are seen only at a glance. However, and this is a big however, if these pictures are looked upon closer, examined beneath the faded black and white surface of scratchy, unrestored film, we can still see commonalities, connected truths about our hopes and dreams for a peaceful, corruption-free world. We still have those dreams. Further, the time periods in which they were shot mean absolutely nothing when one considers that we are still dealing with these political problems to this very day. The Great Dictator lampooned Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. Both are long dead for over half a century. But that doesn't mean Chaplin's film is irrelevant, far from it. We still have dictators in the world today, new dictators. There have been catastrophic conflicts brought on by power-mad despots since World War II. and there have been regimes of hatred and ignorance since the fall of the Third Reich. Chaplin's speech at the end of the film is still regarded as one of the greatest in motion picture history, not only because it was brave during his lifetime and relevant in the 1940s, but also because it stands the test of time. It still means something today, right now. It doesn't matter that the humor style in The Great Dictator is far removed from what we experience in theaters today. What matters is the long-standing message about gentleness versus barbarity. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington may seem cornball at points. Many films in the 1930s had that quality. But the message about political corruption and standing by one's ideals, even in the face of an unstoppable machine, is still salient today. We haven't risen above corruption since then. The common argument of relevancy sometimes plagues otherwise outstanding motion pictures, political or otherwise. Science fiction films that inaccurately predicted what the 21st century would look like are called dated. But why look at the vision of the future as an error, but more of a way things might have been instead? Movies about the civil rights movements that were long ago decided by law are sometimes seen as quaint. But the fight for social justice doesn't end just because of a single win. Movies being too dated to be relevant is an argument that is drummed up so very often, and one can only wonder why. Maybe we are quick to see the difference and slow to see similarity. Dr. Strangelove is not irrelevant because the Cold War ended. Other conflicts arose. Old romance movies with outdated ideas about courtship are not irrelevant because the very idea of romance always endures. The Contender will not be irrelevant after America has its first female vice president or president, because that alone will not end sexism, and that movie is about the concept in general, not just as it pertains to one fictional woman. When watching a movie, the differences are less important than the similarities that we can take away. The landscapes change, the politics shift, but the core of a film can be understood to the keen eye, or maybe just one that is not so cynical. These films are not simple time capsules merely showing us how things used to be, but rather touchstones for our shared humanity.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.